Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the City Council regular meeting for the City of Warrenville for February 5th, 2018. May I have a roll call, please?
Here.
Sorry. Alderman Bevier,
Here.
Alderman Davalos,
Here.
Alderman Goodman,
Here.
Alderman Hoffman,
Here.
Alderman Widener,
Here.
Alderman Wilson is excused, and so is Alderman Eschauer.
I presume. Thank you, Emily. Would you please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we will begin this evening's meeting with the fiscal year 2019 budget presentation for the Community Development Department, given to us by Community Development and Director. He's got another part there now, too. Community and Economic Development Director. I knew there was one word in there I was forgetting. Ron Mentzer. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. I appreciate the opportunity to once again make this annual presentation to you and to the community. Tonight I'll be presenting on the department's. Turn this one off.
Yeah, shut that other one off, I think. Yeah, there we go.
I was going to blame it on John because he told me to put it so close to my mouth tonight. To present the Community Development Department's fiscal year 2019 budget. The three things I want to make sure I accomplish tonight are to share with you what we've accomplished in fiscal year 2018 for the community, some of the challenges that we've experienced and will continue to experience next year, and last but not least, what our fiscal year 2019 priorities are. And when I say we, I'm talking about the Community Development Department. We spent a lot of time, effort, and energy within the department to evaluate what we've accomplished this year, what our proposed budget will be for next year, what our work program will be, and what we see as the priorities for the department next year. I'm going to jump right into it and start out with the economic development related accomplishments, and there's two categories. The first accomplishments relate to things that I call kind of building the foundation, setting the stage for desirable quality economic development in the community. And the first and most important project is the completion of the new full access signalized intersection at Duke Parkway and Route 59. This is a project that's been on the city's plans for more than 30 years, and because of the complexity of the project and the different interests and stakeholders that are involved, we could just never find a path forward to make this happen. And in fact, when you look back at the city's Southwest District Subarea Plan, it identified this particular improvement as the single most important public infrastructure project in the Southwest District. And one of the reasons why we established TIF4 was to make sure that we could construct this project properly. We've worked closely over this past year with a group of stakeholders, including the state of Illinois, Duke Realty, the city of Aurora, and a variety of individual property owners that control some of the land surrounding this intersection. Ultimately, that resulted in a variety of agreements, both funding and intergovernmental agreements that led to the construction of the intersection. This is a photo of the intersection probably sometime in October, right when the trees were starting to change. But what I can tell you is that as a result of the construction of this intersection, maybe a little bit because the Amazon facility there has happened in Aurora, just in the background of the picture, we've experienced a significant increase in the amount of economic development interest in this area of our community. Second in the line of accomplishments, but not too far behind from my perspective, is Civic Center Redevelopment Site Number 1. This has been a project that the city has invested a lot of time, energy, and effort into over the last 10 years to make happen. It involves the redevelopment of a brownfield site into a high-quality residential project. This past year, we were able to negotiate a redevelopment agreement with Earhart Construction, under which they moved forward with the preliminary and final PUD development for that project. The city approved those PUD plans, and I'm happy to report that last week the city closed on the sale of the property in accordance with the provisions of the redevelopment agreement, and Earhart Construction now owns the project. They've paid all outstanding fees and the amount of money that they were required to pay under the development agreement, and they posted $1 million letter of credit to guarantee the construction of the various public improvements that are necessary to support the redevelopment of this particular property. And last but not least, they've submitted for the first 3 building permits on this property. So we're actively reviewing those. A couple other projects a little less significant, but yet still important. We've working through the final stages of the Phase 1 process for the Deal Road turn lane improvements. These are turn lanes that would be designed to improve access into and out of the various commercial uses along Deal Road, located west of Winfield Road and east of Davis Parkway. And then, of course, the city will recall that late last year, the city council endorsed and adopted the city's new brand and logo, which we're actively using to market the community at this point in time. The second part of the economic development accomplishments are really those things that grew out of the foundation that we've established. And these are the new businesses and development that are either happened or located in the community or in the process of happening. The first businesses listed on that list are not the only businesses that have located or chosen to call Warrenville home in this past year, but I highlighted those because they're some of the more prominent businesses, and they are businesses that not only chose Warrenville as a home, but they've also invested a significant amount of money to actually build new facilities or do some significant remodeling or upgrade to existing facilities to our community. The last 2 items in the list are a couple of fairly significant planned unit developments that have worked their way through the city's preliminary PUD approval process and have obtained preliminary PUD approval from the city and are moving forward with the final PUD process at this point in time. The second area of accomplishments involves operation, what I call operation and core services. This past year we had vacancies in both with the building inspector, code enforcement officer position, and our entry-level planner, GIS technician position. Both of those positions were vacant for about 3 months. With the assistance of Assistant City Administrator Christine White, we were successful in recruiting quality candidates for both of those positions, and they're both now filled and we're operating at full strength. Another accomplishment is, in my mind, is a relatively high volume of building permit activity that we're continuing to see. Last fiscal year, we issued 660 building permits, which was by far the largest, highest volume of building permits that the city had ever issued in a single year on record. This year, we're kind of right on track to get to be about that same number. Right now, we're projecting about 650 permits, which would be by far the second highest ever for the We work closely with the city council and the previous city attorney to completely revise Title 8 of the city code. Title 8 is the section of the city code that includes all the city's regulatory rules for construction in the community. Through that process, we've simplified our local code amendments, and we adopted the most current versions of the International Building Code, 1 and 2 Family Dwelling Code, Fire Code, Mechanical Code, Fuel Gas Code, Existing Building Code, and Energy Code. So that puts us in a good position to effectively regulate and ensure that all of the new buildings that are constructed in the community going forward are not only safe, but meet the highest energy efficiency standards, or the current energy efficiency standards. We're in the process, slowly but surely, working through the development of a new intergovernmental agreement with the Warrenville Fire Protection District. The IGA that the city has in place with the fire district now is over 25 years old. and we're working to define more clearly what the roles and responsibilities for each organization will be in the city's building permit review and inspection process and development review and approval process. And then finally, last but not least, bond refunds. You may recall that about 2 years ago we had a discussion at a committee level about the large volume of outstanding and open building and grading bonds that had been accumulated in the city's system by those people that pulled permits, paid bonds, but didn't necessarily close out their permits properly. We outlined for the council a strategy and a process that we were going to implement to try to get our hands around that and reduce that level of outstanding bonds and refund as many as we possibly could, and we've been actively working on that. At the beginning of 2017 calendar year, there were just about 500 open building and grading bonds on file with the city, totaling about $140,000. Since that time, we've closed out permits and refunded, I think it was like almost 340 of those bonds to the appropriate parties for a total of about $107,000. So what's left is really, for the most part, there's a couple still stragglers, but for the most part is related to ongoing projects that are in some stage or another open in the city of Warrenville. So we've made serious headwinds on getting that issue addressed. The third area that I wanted to touch on is community enhancements. There's 2 specific projects that we've made some significant progress on this year. The first one is a little good news and a little bad news. We worked through the phase 1 engineering design process for potential pedestrian, bike trail, multi-use trail improvements along the Mack Road corridor and at the Mack Road Route 59 intersection. This past year, we identified through that process a preferred alternative, which included the potential construction of a multi-use 10-foot wide trail on the north side of the existing Mack Road bridge over the DuPage River. Since that was a preferred alternative, we had to do some additional investigation on the structural capacity and condition of the bridge. And this is the bad news, is that through that additional investigation, we've determined that that bridge is not sufficient, doesn't meet the sufficiency ratings that the state has identified, and we can't add anything to that. It actually has fallen below the criteria that the state's established for replacement. So we have to step back now, and we have to start working through a preliminary design process to actually replace that bridge with a new path on it, which can be a good thing because it might mean that we'll be able to pay for more of these improvements with federal dollars than local dollars. And then finally, last but not least, from a community enhancement standpoint, is the progress we've made on the final phase of the Route 56 Streetscape Enhancement Project. We were able to receive IDOT approval of the final design plans. We also worked with IDOT to have those design plans, engineering plans, bid out last fall. That project was successfully bid and awarded, and the construction of the final phase of the project is set to occur this coming construction season. So I wanted to take just a minute to pause before we jump into what we see as the department's priorities for next year and talk about some of the challenges that we have dealt with this past year and we're going to continue to deal with next year, and trying to balance these challenges or these competing priorities, competing responsibilities and obligations has definitely had an impact on what we're proposing in terms of a fiscal year 2019 budget, what our work program is for next year, and what we as a community development department have identified as what we see are the most important priorities for the department. Starting with one that's pretty obvious, core service and operations. We can't ignore that. We still need to provide good quality service to our customers. But one part of core service and operations that's a little not so obvious is the work that we're going to need to do on the ERP. The ERP is going to be a huge obligation, investment of time, energy, and money across all departments in the city in the short term, but in the long term it should allow us to improve the type of customer service we provide and the efficiencies, the way we do that, and the efficiencies and how we do that. But in the short term for the community development department, that means that we're going to have to invest a lot more time and energy working with the vendor that's going to help the city design and implement that process, because it will involve the creation of a new electronic-based system to process building permits and development proposals, which will replace our paper-based system that we've been working on forever. So that process or that system is going to be tailor-made to meet the city of Warrenville's requirements, but because of that, it's going to involve or require a big investment of time and energy from Community Development Department staff to make sure that the system is designed properly and reflects what we need it to do. Another fairly obvious obligation, but is growing in significance, is the amount of private development that's being proposed in the city of Warrenville and the complexity of that development. Dating back to the beginning of the recession, so 2007, the city development activity slowed down, but the city made a conscious effort to invest a significant amount of time, energy, and money into developing plans and policy documents that laid the foundation for the type of new development that we're now starting to experience. So we invested in setting the table, making sure that it was going to be controlled and designed properly, and now we're starting to see it. Personally, I would like it I wish it was over a longer period of time, but right now it seems like almost every significant development opportunity site in the city that's still remaining is in play in some form or another. And we'll talk about a little more of that when I review the priorities for next year. And city infrastructure enhancement projects is really two things. They interrelate and overlap in some instances. There's city infrastructure improvements that we have to continue to advance and improve or implement, design and implement to support the private development. This isn't the annual road program. These are large-scale city infrastructure improvement projects that need to be done in order to make sure that we can properly service the type of new economic development that's happening in our community and what we've planned for. And then enhancement projects, we've received outside funding commitments for a variety of, I would say, very desirable community enhancement projects. I talked about one, which would be the Mack Road Trail Improvement Project. Another one I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation is the Prairie Path Trailhead Project. We've got funding commitments, so there's kind of a time constraint. We need to keep moving those things forward if we're going to take advantage of that funding commitment and get these projects implemented. So they become somewhat of a priority, balancing with the rest of these. Policy and regulatory development, every year something new comes up, some new initiative comes up, or we identify a need to adjust or revise some of our policy or regulatory documents in order to more clearly spell out what our rules and expectations are for changes that are inevitably going to happen in our community. And there's a couple of those that I'm going to talk about as priorities for next year. And last but not least are special projects. These are projects that weren't necessarily envisioned in our work program at the beginning of the year, but because of direction from the city council or some outside force or opportunity, they become a priority from the community. And there's some of those this year, and there'll be some next year. So let's dive into priorities. City infrastructure enhancement projects. The Route 56 streetscape project I talked about, it's been bid out. It will be constructed this year. It involves a variety of both wayfinding and masonry monument signage through the Route 56 corridor, a new city streetlight system at the Batavia Road, Route 56 intersection, some landscaping improvements, some pedestrian lighting improvements along the multi-use trail on the north side of the Route 56 corridor, and then some stone bridge monument improvements on all four corners of the Route 56 DuPage River Bridge. The Illinois Prairie Path Albright Park Trailhead Phase 1. This year there was a decision package and there was money included in the fiscal year 2018 budget to move forward with the Phase 1 design process for the Prairie Path Trailhead Improvement Project. And we have recently been actively working with the consultant team to define a proposed scope of work for that project and a proposed contract. It's our intent to bring forward to the City Council at the next Community Development Committee that contract for your consideration. If we go forward with that project is going to take, because of the other competing priorities, is going to probably take us through much of next fiscal year for the Phase 1 design process. And then the Mack Road Bridge Trail project I talked about a little earlier is we're going to move forward, attempt to secure federal funding for the replacement of the bridge. If we can get a funding commitment for that, then we'll work through the phase 1 design process for the replacement of the bridge with the multi-use trail on the bridge, as I previously discussed. City infrastructure enhancement projects, specifically infrastructure projects. I'm not going to go through these. These are those infrastructure projects that are necessary to support private development and serve private development. I'm sure that when Public Works provides their budget presentation, they'll probably include these and talk about them in a little more detail. I included them in the Community Development Department budget because the city's senior civil engineer works out of the Community Development Department, does do a lot of review and oversight of new development engineering, stormwater, drainage complaints, but she also assists and supports the Public Works Department as they work to design and advance the construction of these types of public improvement projects. So we kind of cross over and work together on that, so it will have an impact, and it is a priority in our department to help get these things done. Private development, Southwest District. There's a lot of fairly significant projects listed there. Many of these are directly related to or have some tie back to the new intersection that's being constructed. All total, there's about 90 acres of land involved with all those projects. And if they all get approved and implemented as they're currently being talked about and proposed, we're talking about $150 million worth of new construction, give or take. Probably out of that whole list of items, the one that's most exciting to me is the one that's probably least farthest along, but still we've been spending a lot of time on, is the last one, the Two Brothers Brewing corporate campus development. They purchased the 20-plus acres at the northwest corner of 59 and 56, and we've had probably 6 or 8 meetings in the last 6 months with the Two Brothers and their consultant team to talk about how that project's evolving and what it might look like and what kind of process it needs to work through in order to get approved by the city. In fact, this coming Thursday, we have a joint meeting between city representatives, Two Brothers consultant team representatives, and IDOT offices to talk about their concept development plans and preliminary access requirements and proposals for the project to see what kind of feedback we can get from IDOT. It's access for the project off of 5956 is a big issue for the project, as you might imagine. They're proposing a combination of a new brewery, banquet facilities, potential hotels, some ancillary outlot, commercial restaurant uses. So they really do need to have fairly good access off of those adjacent highways to make that all work. Private development in Cantera. Last council meeting, the city council approved the preliminary plans for Riverview West, a mixed-use project out in Cantera Subarea C. This Thursday, the Plan Commission is going to be considering preliminary PUD plans for a Class A 4-story apartment complex wrapped around an internal parking garage in Cantera Subarea G on the unused parking lot area located immediately west of the Cantera Theater building. We've been working with the developer that has a letter of intent and is actively developing proposed design plans for a proposed new hotel on the parking lot, somewhat unused parking lot area that's located between Chewy's on the east and Main Event on the west. And then finally, last but not least, the BP facility at the southwest corner of Winfield Road and Warrenville Road is set to move forward with the construction of their rehabilitation and reuse of the convenience center building at that gas station to incorporate at least a Dunkin' Donuts and maybe something more. Private development in the Old Town Civic Center sub-area. There's a couple projects that are in some stage of consideration by the city. Of course, the first one that we talked about earlier, which is actually going to get constructed, is the redevelopment of Civic Center redevelopment site number 1 by Earhart. 27 small lot, single family homes, semi-custom homes. the overall value of that project when complete will be somewhere around $12 to $14 million. There's another developer that has the 4.5 acres of property, approximately 4 acres of property at the northwest corner of Butterfield Road and Batavia Road under contract for a project they're calling Warrenville Crossings, which is a family sit-down type restaurant at the hard corner, and then potentially some type of attached, relatively dense, single-family homes on the bulk of the remaining portion of the property. Total, those two projects probably have a value of somewhere around $27 or $28 million should they get approved and constructed. A couple other projects that I'm assuming that we'll see move forward this coming year is Speedway has informed us they intend to move forward with the redevelopment of their gas station at the northwest corner of Batavia and Route 59. They had already received preliminary or special use approvals from the city in the past for that reconstruction, redevelopment. They're trying to finalize the addition of some additional property on the north edge of the property that they can incorporate in the project. If they're able to do that, they'll have to come back through the city's process. If they can't, they intend to move forward generally with the plans that were approved previously by the city. And then last but not least, we've had a number of recent conversations with a couple of different developers that are very interested in actively working through trying to negotiate a contract to purchase the Shilley property on the south side of Ferry Road, east of Raymond Drive. It's about a 7 to 8 acre piece of land. 7 or 8 acre piece of land. It's zoned industrial at this point in time, but the uses that are being proposed are some type of office or hospitality type use. Priorities from an operational and special project standpoint, ERP. We've been told that about 25% of the chief code official and the administrative assistant that supports the building and code enforcement division and the public works department will need to be devoted to the ERP design or the process to design and implement the ERP in the community development department. We continue to negotiate with the owners of the Citgo property to see if we can find a path forward where the city can purchase that property. It's contaminated. Our approach at this point in time is try to force the existing property owners to remediate that property as part of that transaction. It's certainly not a simple transaction, and we're dealing with a lot of complex projects or problems there that we don't want to expose ourselves to unnecessarily, I should say. The 2020 census is underway. City Community Development Department staff has been actively working with the Census Bureau, and it's important that we continue to provide information to them and respond and review information that they provide to us so that we can ensure as best as possible that all the residents in the city of Warrenville are accurately accounted for in the 2020 census. We committed to the City Council previously that we will work diligently with the post office and the postal customers in the Southwest District that currently, the section of the Southwest District in the city of Warrenville that currently have Naperville mailing addresses to see if we can get those mailing addresses changed to be Warrenville mailing addresses. We intend to work and support the effort of the community or the Public Works Department to develop a complete streets policy that will provide some framework on how the city is going to address bike and pedestrian improvements and future infrastructure improvement projects. And a couple of zoning ordinance revisions that we feel need to be advanced this next fiscal year include making some adjustments to the zoning to clearly identify what the provisions are for new solar installations. There's a new state law, and there's going to be, it's almost assured that there's going to be a fairly significant explosion of solar installations, not just on individual homeowners' rooftops, but throughout the state. There's provisions in that ordinance that really encourage and provide some incentives for what's called community solar, which could be not community solar farms that are 20 or 30 acres, but smaller things that might happen on a commercial property or some property. And we really don't have any provisions to identify whether that's permitted, and if it is permitted, what are the rules and regulations that apply. So it is going to be something we're going to be confronted with, and we need to try to get out in front of it as best as possible. The other area that we're suggesting we have as a priority for the department is to develop an overlay district, zoning overlay district for the Old Town Civic Center subarea, which will potentially allow for properties in the Old Town Civic Center subarea to be developed in a manner that's what I would call more traditional in form than suburban commercial in form. Right now, our zoning ordinance is very suburban nature, which basically, if you implement that, it requires buildings to be set back way off the road, and parking usually ends up out in front of the buildings, not real pedestrian feel or kind of a traditional town feel. With the properly designed subarea or overlay district, you can give property owners the alternative that they can develop their property or use their property in accordance with the existing zoning or with the provisions of this overlay district, which would really be designed to facilitate a more pedestrian, small town type flavor of development. And then finally, last but not least, and very important, is we've developed a decision package, and it'll be presented to the City Council for the creation and funding of a new staff engineer. This would be an entry-level position. The goal of this position would be twofold. It would be to allow, with the large amount of new development that's in process and will be constructed in the community, along with the public infrastructure projects and the handful of significant and complex, sometimes complex, community enhancement projects. We really want to allow the senior civil engineer to focus her energies on important and complex issues and use this position to do some of the more day-to-day, simpler type engineering review, inspection type processes within the department, number one. And number two, a new staff engineer would be able to do those kind of simplistic reviews and do some of the inspections out in the field of engineering infrastructure installations, which will allow us to reduce some of our outside consulting costs going forward from an engineering standpoint. And there's a decision package that we have prepared, which will provide more detail on the goals and objectives of that position and the cost and savings if we do fill that position. The last thing I want to cover is there's a lot there. It's kind of overwhelming at times, exciting, overwhelming, kind of mixed feelings about it. The work program and priorities for the department, granted, are pretty aggressive. I would admit that. I think anybody in the community development department would admit that. But these are all things, it's hard to figure out what's not a priority. These are all important things for one reason or another. There are things, though, that are out there that we've discussed that we either the council feels is important or staff feels are important that we're just not going to be able to get to. These are some of the larger projects that will, in order to move any of these things forward, it would require a significant amount of time, energy, and dollars that we just don't see that we're going to have this next fiscal year. So at this point in time, we're keeping these on the list in our work program, but they're identified as things that we're not expecting to advance to any significant degree this next year because of all those other priorities. So with that, I open it up for questions.
Questions from the council. Alderman Goodman.
Thanks so much for that detailed presentation. There's so much going on. I'm surprised you have time to stand here and give us presentations. I did have two questions. First was about the zoning ordinance revisions. I was a little surprised not to see anything about small cell wireless on there because I know we've talked about this in the past. Is that something you expect maybe as a more minor revision to the zoning ordinance in the coming year?
We've had some discussions about what would be necessary from a zoning perspective. I think primarily we're based on the communications that community development staff has had with our public works department and our legal representatives, that we think the best way to approach that primarily would be through a licensing permitting process under the city code, not necessarily the zoning ordinance. There may need to be some minor revisions to different provisions of the zoning ordinance, but we're not even sure if any of that's going to be necessary because there may be a state law that preempts our ability to regulate it at all anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there may be a state law, but the state law might not be a good one. The one that's been proposed is certainly takes away our ability to do things. And so sometimes having the ordinance in place ahead of a bad state law can give you authority that, well, it doesn't always work that way, but it just seemed like the sort of thing which might have some urgency. So I'm glad you're aware of it and working through it, and I'm sure the city attorney can, express any opinions on that the city needs to take into consideration. My second question had to do with the Shilley property development and what effect that would have on the billboard.
As I understand it, well, first, the status of the billboard is that they're still working their way through whatever state of Illinois permit processes that they need to in order to secure the proper permits from IDOT in order to come and to apply for permits with the city of Warrenville. And they haven't been able to secure those permits for whatever reason. But second and apart from that is that the parties that are most interested in developing on the property are fully aware of the possibility. Obviously, there's at least one billboard on the property now and some cell towers, and they're fully aware that there's an agreement that exists between the city of Warrenville and the property owner that could potentially allow for a second billboard should they be able to secure the permits from the state of Illinois. And these two other uses that are the most interested uses don't have an issue with that, from what I've been told. I assume they're negotiating the contract and they know it's a possibility.
Thank you.
Okay. Alderman Avalos.
Thank you. Wow, exciting times. This is great. I'm excited. I have two questions. One is sort of a general question. What sort of guidance, and I know we're going to be talking about some of this later, the projects in the new business part. What sort of input are you looking for from the council as far as these projects go? I mean, all of us have our own interests in things, but we generally can see there's a logic to this that has to happen. So I'm interested in that. And the second thing is, you talked about the solar and what's happening in the state, and I know we have a decision package about the maybe a solar project. So I'm assuming your mentioning of solar in these special projects will include some of that, looking at what we can actually do and take advantage of funding that's out there, the state, the thing, and move
Well,
something
the actual
forward.
solar project is something that's being spearheaded. That's one thing that
Okay.
the Community Development Department doesn't
Okay.
have our hands on. That's something that's
Okay,
being
so you're just talking about the ordinances and
talking about
Okay.
making sure that our zoning ordinance clearly addresses solar installations from a variety of different perspectives.
Okay, so any input the council would have would sort of be when we talk about all the departments together and where we're kind of going with that. Okay, I just wanted to know when and how, and thank you.
And I think there'll be, honestly, I think from the conversations we've had from a staff perspective, there'll be multiple opportunities for that to happen through the balance of the budget process, starting with tonight.
Okay, Ron, thank you so much. Congratulations on a very productive and successful 2017, and we certainly are excited at the prospects for 2018. Don't get sick, please, because we need you, clearly. And we certainly appreciate all the effort that you put into making these projects turn out in a way that's in the best long-term interest of the community. So thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the rest of our program for the evening, following up here with citizens' comments. We have one person who signed up this evening, Mr. Bob Siebert. Be nice.
Bob Siebert, Albright Court. 2 months ago, on December 4th, you had your tax levy. I asked a question, and they stated that didn't have the answer. I have not received any answer, so I'll ask the question again. The levy shows an increase from 2016 of $23,290. The increase from the 2016 levy in the 2017 proposed levy. It also states the proposed levy includes the capture of new construction EAV growth of $5,200,000. If we apply the 2016 tax rates, if we reduce these rates for the 6.4% increase in the proposed EAV increases for 2017, this would generate between $35,000 and $36,000 in revenue from this new construction of $5.2 million. However, as I stated, the ordinance that you passed shows an increase of $23,290. So either the ordinance is incorrect, or the statement that you captured the $5.2 million is incorrect. Within the tax cap, there is confusion on some of the applications. You have to capture both the revenue and the EAV, the revenue and the EAV, in order to obtain that. Otherwise, if you capture only the EAV, the total amount, the $35,000, still goes into the coffers. But what that does is it pays some of the taxes that the other taxpayers paid in the previous year, 2016. So my question was, what did you capture by this? Where are the dollars? Are they hidden in the 2016 figure? Where has the $36,000 been applied? There's no question those individuals with the new properties, new construction, pay that amount of money. The key is how it is applied. And this is determined, the application with the tax cap, because with the tax cap, you get an exemption with new construction. So that is my question with these as to what is the actual flow of the new construction with the dollars? Is it going to reduce the taxpayers' funds, or is it coming in as a bonus to the city on the new construction because we had a .0210 tax cap, which would limit it to about $71,000. So the question that I have here is, where did these numbers balance and fit in? I would appreciate an answer.
Okay, Bob, thank you. We'll move on then to official and staff comments. A couple things this evening from me to begin with. DuPage County Transportation Department is hosting some open houses to discuss the future of transportation in the county. They're looking for input and insight and comments from the community about the future of transportation in DuPage County. They have 4 meetings scheduled. The first one is going to be on Tuesday, February 6th. That would be tomorrow night at Power Forward DuPage, 28600 Bella Vista Parkway in Warrenville. That's from 5 to 7 p.m. The meetings are interactive with an open house format, so you can come anytime and leave anytime. There'll be exhibits for viewing a survey, and members of the planning team available for discussion. So if you have interest in learning about the future of transportation in DuPage County, or providing some input about what you think is important, these would be good meetings to attend. So again, by the county, these meetings are being hosted by the county, DuPage County Transportation Department. The first one, Tuesday, February 6th, tomorrow night, 5 to 7 p.m. at 28600 Bella Vista Parkway in Warrenville. So that we have. Also coming up at the end of the month, our annual State of the City address by the mayor. I will be talking about all the things that have transpired in a positive way in the last year and what we have to look forward to. Although Ron hit a lot of them tonight, so thanks for the preview, Ron. That'll help me provide my presentation on the 28th. Everything begins at 6 p.m. here in the council chambers on the 28th. Light refreshments will be provided by the Western DuPage Chamber of Commerce, and at 6:30 we'll begin the presentation. So everyone is invited. If you attend anything at all during the year, this is a good one to get a kind of a good overview of what's been happening and what you might anticipate to happen coming in the future. So again, the 28th, Wednesday evening, 6 p.m. here at the council chambers at City Hall. And that's all I have for this evening. Clerk. Thank you. Treasurer.
Yes, I'd just like to remind everybody that's driving around school time that, especially with this bad weather, to please just slow down. The kids are out there, and with this bad weather, we want to make sure that they get to school safely.
Thank you, Larry. Alderman? Alderman Widener?
Yeah, I just wanted to express appreciation to the staff, in particular Public Works Department and their director, or Deputy Public Works Director, Phil Kukler. I noticed in the weekly highlights that they sent a letter out to Illinois Department of Transportation addressing some of the intersection concerns that we have in town, those specifically being the left turn lanes from Butterfield Road onto Batavia Road, and Batavia Road in Illinois, Route 59, where there's no turn on red when pedestrians are present, and also the egress and ingress at Winchester subdivision during rush hours. And I just think it's great that we're reacting to these situations. I think it will help maintain or elevate the city of Warrenville's safety status, which we are receiving awards for. So I would just like to, again, say thanks for that initiative. Secondly, I wanted to express appreciation. There's a few annual reports that are being submitted on tonight's agenda by the members of the Bicyclist and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, who are submitting their 2017 annual report of all their accomplishments and goals for 2018. And the Tourism and Arts Commission volunteers are also submitting their annual report for 2017. And the Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals likewise is presenting their 2017 annual report. And where would we be without these volunteers' fine works and commitments? So thank you very much to all those who are contributing to those volunteer groups. And that's all I had. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman. And I would just add that for all of our commissions, currently there are no openings. We have them all fully staffed with volunteers. So I would like to add my appreciation to all the volunteers that help us get our job done. City Administrator.
I have nothing to add tonight, thank you.
Thank you, John. And Attorney?
Nothing to report.
Thank you, Barb. We'll move on to the approval of the agenda for this evening. Alderman Widener.
Move to approve the agenda for the February 5th, 2018 City Council regular meeting.
Second.
Second by Alderman Davalos. Alderman Goodman.
Yes, I'd like to remove item 6H.
H. Do the seconder and the motioner agree to that change to the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, any other changes? Seeing none, all in favor then of the amended agenda?
Aye.
Opposed? The amended agenda is approved. We have several sets of minutes that need approval also. Alderman Widener.
Motion to approve minutes of the January 15th, 2018 City Council regular meeting, to approve the minutes of the January 15th, 2018 City Council closed session, and to approve the minutes of the January 22nd, 2018 Public Safety and Finance Committee of the Whole regular meeting.
Second.
Second by Alderman Davalos. Any discussion of those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The minutes are approved. The consent agenda as amended for this evening reads as follows. Item 6A, accept Public Safety and Finance Committee recommendation, waive second reading and pass ordinance 02018-02, amending Title III, Chapter 26, Section 2 of the City Code, business license required, increasing the application and renewal fee for massage businesses and limiting the number of massage business licenses to 8. B, accept Zoning Board of Appeals recommendation, waive second reading and pass ordinance 02018-03, approving a variation of the Warrenville sign ordinance to allow the existing monument sign at 27W 457 Old Warrenville Road to remain in its current location. C, accept staff recommendation, waive second reading and pass ordinance 02018-04, amending City Code Title III, Chapter 2 to decrease the number of Class A2 liquor licenses from 9 to 8. D, accept Public Safety and Finance Committee recommendation and pass resolution R2018-03, approving the memorandum of understanding between the City of Warrenville and the College of DuPage Homeland Security Training Institute for use of the firearms range. E, accept Public Safety and Finance Committee recommendation and award $99,927 in hotel and motel tax grant funding to various applicants per the Tourism and Arts Commission recommendation memo dated January 26, 2017. F, accept Public Safety and Finance Committee recommendation and approve the Warrenville Historical Society's grant request in the amount of $15,000 from the Hotel Motel Tax Fund to cover the cost of their part-time museum director/curator, and direct staff to include this funding in the FY 2019 budget. G, accept Public Safety and Finance Committee recommendation, waive the requirement to establish a naming committee, and approve the renaming of the Kiwanis Gazebo in Albright Park to the Richard M. Volkmer Kiwanis Gazebo. I, accept Public Safety and Finance Committee recommendation and accept the updates to the capital maintenance and replacement plan for 2017 per the staff memo dating January 18, 2018. And direct staff to incorporate those adjustments into an updated CMRP document. J, receive and file the 2017 annual report for the Bicyclist and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. K, receive and file the 2017 annual report for the Tourism and Arts Commission. L, receive and file the 2017 annual report for the Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals. M, receive and file minutes of the Police Pension Board regular meeting held on October 24th, 2017. N, receive and file the minutes of the Board of Fire and Police Commission regular meeting held on November 21st, 2017. O, receive and file minutes of the Tourism and Arts Commission regular meeting held on December 14th, 2017. P, receive and file minutes of the Environmental Advisory Commission regular meeting held on December 19th, 2017. Q, receive and file minutes of the Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals regular meeting held on January 18th, 2018. R, receive and file report of invoices paid up to January 31st, 2018 in the amount of $261,085.57. S, authorize expenditures for invoices due on or before February 20th, 2018. in the amount of $229,429.77. And T, receive and file report of debit card expenditures for the month of December 2017 in the amount of $9,472.93. Alderman Widener.
Motion to approve the agenda as presented by Mayor David Brummel.
Second.
Motion and a second on the consent agenda. May I have a roll call, please?
Alderman Berry.
Aye.
Alderman Bevere.
Aye.
Alderman Hoffman.
Aye.
Where'd it go? Alderman Widener.
Aye.
Alderman Goodman.
Aye.
Alderman Davalos.
Aye.
Okay, we will return to item 6H. Alderman Goodman, did you wish to bring that forward?
Yes. I'd like to make a motion to accept Public Safety and Finance Committee recommendation and direct staff to review the feasibility and costs associated with installation of street lighting at the Continental Drive and Meadow Avenue intersection with Route 59 and at the Batavia Road and Route 56 intersection, and the feasibility and costs associated with making the additional pedestrian safety improvements that have not already been completed. As noted, and the letter from the Illinois Department of Transportation dated December 6, 2017, and direct staff to include funding in the fiscal year 2019 budget for these improvements.
Second.
Second by Alderman Davalos. Discussion, Alderman Goodman?
Yes, in accordance with the staff memo, which has a very clear recommendation that we put off this matter for a little while, I took it off the consent agenda as requested by staff so that we can put off this matter for a little while. That's all I've got.
Okay, City Administrator, some explication?
Thank you. The motion was made at the last committee meeting in January. Our Deputy Public Works Director was not present at that meeting because he wasn't required to be. Subsequent to that meeting, he's gone back and prepared this memo that gives the update on all those items. As you read the memo, you'll find that most of the items in the motion are already either in progress or have been completed, and especially the lighting for Batavia and Butterfield Road is coming up in a couple of months. It's already slated under contract and will be completed in the early spring, or given IDOT at least by the late spring of 2018 this year. So the last item in question is the lighting at the intersection that we've been focusing on the most, Route 59 with Meadow and Continental. There's a lot of issues that are involved there. Plus, he points out there's several other intersections that either already have significant pedestrian and bicyclist crossings or will very shortly. For example, Mack Road, where we're putting in the path in near future. And what, if any, consideration should be given to those intersections. All we're asking tonight is simply to postpone this action so that we can talk about it more next Monday night at the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee when he will be present, and we can have a more involved discussion with the staff that has more of the information about it. He did include cost projections for those intersections, so you have that information, and then we can have that fuller discussion then, and then take direction from the council however you want to give us that direction to do that. We didn't see any concern with delaying it by simply a week for that more involved discussion, so the council has more information before they make their final decision. And then if you wish to have it in next year's budget or when we want to get, when we can get that project going, you can give us direction at that time. Thank you.
Okay, specifically, what action would you want from the council tonight on this item?
Basically, it's a request just to postpone until the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee, the whole meeting on February 12th.
Okay, so
delayed by 1 week for further discussion.
Okay, so we need a motion then for that. Alderman Goodman?
I move to postpone discussion of this item to the February 12th Public Works and Infrastructure Committee of the whole meeting.
Second.
Second by Alderman Davalos. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're done, and then we don't have to go back to the original motion, right? Because we've postponed it. Okay, very good. We're done with that part of the agenda then. We have nothing under regular agenda, nothing under unfinished business. We do have an item of new business, an informational presentation of the draft FY 2019 citywide work plan, and the presenter will be Assistant City Administrator Christina. Nope. She's just team effort. Excellent. That's even better. The City Administrator and Assistant City Administrator will make this presentation.
never get old.
Too late.
Yeah, for me. Thank you. We wanted to talk for a few minutes tonight as we get rolling into the budget process, as it's going on in earnest already starting, about the citywide work plan. We haven't created one of these in the past. We discovered the need for it, I'll get to in a moment, but we're trying to make sure we have all the city resources focused on getting the highest quality outcomes. The heading of the next slide. A few months ago, actually in early December, during one of the let me back up a second. I have one-to-one meetings with all the senior staff, the department heads and Christina, and even with Alma every month to talk about what's going on and look at issues, in addition to the weekly staff meetings that we have. During the meeting, not surprisingly with Ron Menser, we started talking about all the projects that are coming up between Public Works, community development, all of them, also the nexus with the senior civil engineer working with both departments. All the great things that are going on, let's make sure we understand. Just as Ron pointed out, there's some exciting projects, some very big projects, but there's quite a backlog of projects going on. And it's really an overwhelming amount. Take another step back. In future years, now that we've discovered not just the departments need to have a work plan so they're a little more organized, and we talked to the council about departmental priorities for the city, we need to look at it in terms of the whole city. We haven't had this really come to a head in the past, but there's so much going on now, it's very clear. Future years, we will bring this to you either in the very late fall, maybe November, or in early January as a precursor to the rest of the budget. But here we are at this point of time. It really should have been preceding Ron's presentation, but there hasn't been time to do that. So we're playing a little catch up this year. What we're talking about is the larger projects that tap resources from multiple departments. Ron hit a couple of them perfectly, kind of setting us up for this discussion right now. Things that have to do with new development and all the reviews and work that they have to do also involves the engineer in their department, but then involves Public Works because there's infrastructure that's needed to be reviewed, be planned, sometimes city projects. So it's not just one department that's affected. And as you can imagine, while those two departments are very involved with those things, finance also gets involved, administration gets involved in some parts, and police will eventually be involved because they involve new buildings, new structures, so we all get some impact from that. We've come to the realization the city resources at present are not sufficient to do everything that we want to do in next year. All the initiatives that we have in the queue, if you will, can't be done all at once. We're a product of our own success. Ron had pointed out all the years of all the plans that the city worked on very hard to get to a point where we could hopefully have some new development, and then some things happened, as he was talking about and alluding to. The economy has been very good post-recession, and something called Amazon was built on our border and helped speed up, expedite the construction of that road, the Duke Parkway connection to Route 59, and Duke also owns property in the city of Warrenville, and they're bringing out the utilities, water and sewer, to that whole southwest district, especially the quadrant that's south of 56 and west of 59. We didn't anticipate those would happen so quickly. We're very grateful they have. Those are the two biggest key factors in redeveloping that area. In staff, we hoped after those plans were developed, probably a 5 to 10 year horizon, a lot of these things would happen, probably being led by Two Brothers development. Right now, that's the development, the exciting one Ron talked about, but lagging behind many other developments. A lot happening all at once, which is great, but we want to be careful not to swamp the boat with all the good things. So here's a great problem to have, but we have to sort it out and figure out how to address it. We have a growing backlog of projects. I can't think of a thing that isn't an excellent idea, great project, good thing for the city for one thing or another to accomplish, enhance our paths, enhance the environment, redevelop things. But if we do it if we stick with the status quo and try to do it all, we're either going to have poor quality results or we're going to get into a gridlock situation where things have severe delays. As Ron also pointed out, some of them have contractual obligations where we have made commitments to a Duke Realty, for example, to put sewer lines in. We have development that's going through the zoning entitlement process that has, those developers have a right to petition for that redevelopment and have a right to get answers in a timely manner. We can't delay those, and there's some commitments that we have to make to keep up. Others, we have grant obligations for paths that we need to get, or other infrastructure projects we need to keep up on, or we'll lose that money or have some other issues. The City Council has always identified, or in all the recent plans, economic development is a high priority. That has guided our thinking on how we should prioritize things. Christina will get into in a minute how we prioritize things in the city work plan, citywide work plan, but economic development's a high priority, followed by the infrastructure that would support that. Ron talked about that in his presentation. And there's other infrastructure maintenance and projects that we have to do, but if there's a big project and we have to put a sewer line in, that becomes a high priority project. Major private developments, all those great things you heard about in Cantera and out in the Southwest District are impacting multiple departments. And this is where Christina's going to take over, then I'll come back and talk about next steps.
Thank you. So as John mentioned, staff came together and we worked out a citywide list of projects. And there's a couple key points that we wanted to bring to your attention about the project list. These are all large projects that impact at least 2 city departments. So each department every year has put together a work plan that includes all of their priorities for their individual departments. If it impacts only their department, that is going to continue to be on the departmental work plans. This project list, again, is only multi-department, large projects. Another thing that's not going to be on the citywide list is all of the core functions. As Ron identified, and as we talk about regularly, there are core functions, the routine things that the city departments do to serve the community. Those are not included on either of the lists, but are important to mention because they take up a significant amount of staff resources on a regular basis. So how did we come up with the prioritization that's on the list? We tried to mirror as much as possible what we do with the department work plans so as to keep it consistent. So the priorities are split up as to Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Your Tier 1 priorities are your time-sensitive, large, significant, have some core operational impact or private development impact. A lot of the economic development projects that Ron identified, the ERP is certainly there because it's a multi-department, huge undertaking that impacts all of the operations of the city. The Tier 2 important initiatives are either related somehow to a high priority Tier 1 initiative, may affect operations, or are current and ongoing, already have funding, have a grant identified, or some contractual obligation that makes it a higher priority initiative that needs to get done. Delaying either priority 1 or priority 2, or Tier 1, Tier 2 level priorities could have a negative impact long term, and are both items or priorities that are listed in Tier 1 and Tier 2 can be identified with the current resources or the resources that we've added to the budget this year that we anticipate. And then the Tier 3 desirable and valuable initiatives are the ones that, as John mentioned, we always have projects and things that we want to do that are important, that have some value, but these are the projects that if we delayed them are not necessarily going to have a negative lasting impact, and that staff does not believe can be accomplished with the current or anticipated resources without some shifting of a Tier 1 or Tier 2 project. So John is now going to talk about the next steps and the action items.
Thank you. What we're talking about tonight is not removing projects from our long list of many things the council has given us, directed us on, but it's reprioritizing and sometimes rescheduling how we get them done. I firmly believe given the right amount of time, we can get all of the things done. We just can't do them all at once. We can't do them, not only can we not do them all at once, we can't do them with good quality if we try to do most of them all at once. So if we set the right prioritization, working with the council and the staff together, coming up with the new priorities on how we can get things done immediately for fiscal 19, and then start looking at years beyond that. So what we're looking from you tonight is not a decision. If there's some questions tonight, we'll be happy to answer them. The staff is here. We've had over the last month and a half, I think 3 or 4 meetings with the whole staff, spent a couple hours each time trying to figure out how to go about prioritizing this, and then came up with a list that you have in your packet of how we prioritize things. But that's staff's input. That's the final decision is the council's, and things can be moved around, but if something goes up on a higher priority, we've got to move something down. It's a very, there's not enough room to just push more things up, if you will. What we're asking tonight is review the project list, what's in your packet, take it home, please peruse it, come up with good questions. If you have questions in the next, I'm sorry, let me finish my thought there. We will put this item on all the committee of the whole meetings for a discussion item, much like we do with the budget discussions coming up in a few weeks, so that there's more discussion opportunities before the budget is adopted. So we have 3 or 4, maybe 5 committee of the whole meetings coming up before the end of April, so we can get more input. So have your questions, bring them back to meetings. If you have questions in between that time, please contact me, call me, see me, email me. I'll try to get some answers. It may take a little more work to have the information for the next meeting. We will share all the questions and the answers that are in between meetings with everyone in the packet so that you all have the same information, just like we do with budget questions that are subsequent to the budget meeting. We need your feedback and direction. Ultimately, we're going to need approval of this from the council. But the way that our staff sees it is what must be advanced in fiscal 19. We talked about some of the criteria that staff rank things on, legal commitments, obligations, support for development, and so on. That's how we see the priorities, how we interpret your priorities to be, but we need your input. And then what can be delayed that's on the current docket or in process to fiscal 20 or beyond. If we have enough time, we can finish all of these things. We just need to apply the right resources and spread them out. So, and again, I said a couple of times, staff and council, the intent is collaborate on what the priorities should be. Ultimately, it's the city council that makes those decisions, but you hire us for our input. So, next steps, continue these discussions at future meetings. The citywide work plan, you have our draft in your packet, will be revised with council feedback. Hopefully we get a consensus and there's, I hope it's a unanimous decision from the council, but at least the majority of the council gives us direction on what we need to do and how we should prioritize those things. And then our goal would be to have the citywide work plan approved with the budget approval in late April. So the meeting when you're approving the budget, the citywide work plan to be approved there. Typically you have the authorized strength ordinance, et cetera. Then I want to make one note about the future. We're talking about the resources we have today. As Christina noted, Ron brought up one staff position we're looking for additional. Next week, the administration department, also Public Works, do their presentations. Administration will be asking to, we'll get to the details next week, but we're going to ask to re-establish the full-time administrative services coordinator position. That position and the staff engineer are anticipated, we're assuming, and it's not our decision ultimately, that they'll be filled, and that's part of how we did the prioritization, assuming those 2 positions will be available to us. So just keep that in mind. In the future beyond that, because of the new development specifically, and the growth that we're anticipating in the community because of all the residential and commercial development that we were talking about, it's our anticipation that in the year 2020, fiscal 2020, we will need to do a staffing services and facilities study for the whole city to make sure we are right-sized going forward from there. I just want to note that there's nothing to decide about that right now. It's things that we will find as we're going along. We want to make sure the development comes to fruition before we start a staffing future facility study, but it looks like those things are coming and we want to start getting ready for those in the future. That will help us to get out in front of the future work. For now, this is our proposal to try to reprioritize stuff so we can stay on top of what we currently have and provide the high quality that the council and the community have expected from the city. With that, if there's any questions tonight, I'd be happy to answer them.
Alderman Widener.
Yeah, thank you for the report. I'm just wondering, within the prioritization, are they listed in, like, I guess I could look at, say, the number 3 priorities. Are they ranked in accordance, or are they just all bundled together? Like, are you putting them from most important to least important in staff's consideration, or are they just all alphabetized?
Yes, they're alphabetized by the lead department.
Okay.
Right, so it's not a list of priorities within the tiers that exist. So all the threes, they're not ranked in any priority level at that point.
Okay. And was there a ranking process that or like how were these priorities determined by staff? Was it?
Yeah, so we met, as John pointed out, we met several times, and what we discussed when we were meeting were mainly the economic development and the private development priorities, and then the ripple effect that occurs as a result of that, as well as the ERP project. So we started with the Tier 1 prioritization, and from there, we really looked at what ripple effect that had, because one of the things that we identified as part of our individual department work plans, or what was lacking from our individual department work plans, is there was no connection when we did those work plans every year to the things that affect other departments. So when we got together and figured out the Tier 1 priorities, it really came down to those have to be accomplished this year. There's no way to delay those Tier 1 priorities for one reason or another. We then looked at the Tier 2 ones, and a lot of those Tier 2 priorities are directly related to a private development or economic development priority in the Tier 1 list, or have some other requirement. For example, the quiet zone update, our quiet zone is going to be expiring in this upcoming year, so we can't hold off on that. The 2020 census is coming, so we need to prepare for that. So it was very much a discussion throughout with the different department heads and with staff as to what things were tied together and where things needed to go based on whether or not there was already some progress made or if there was some tie to another priority that made it a higher priority. That was the prioritization.
Thank you.
Sure.
Alderman Goodman.
Can I have an explanation of one or two of these things? What does Basin 1, Phase 1 of the sanitary sewer I&I mean? Is that just, I don't know, the first step of what's going to be a many years long process?
Deputy Public Works Director Phil Kukler. Phil?
Yes, actually, there's going to be a presentation on that. Okay. There's going to be a presentation on that next week at the Committee of the Whole meeting. Our consultant's going to do a presentation of the I&I reduction program, and then the first phase of that program is going to be an engineering contract for next fiscal year. But it will be a multi-year, probably 11 or 12-year process to go through and address I&I in the community.
Okay, so this is the first year size chunk of it? I mean, I don't really know what Basin 1 is. That some sort of stormwater basin drainage area of the community?
They divided up the city into basins for sanitary sewer, so they took a certain length of sanitary sewer. We have a total, I forgot how many miles of it, but they divided it into more manageable chunks to be able to analyze and then address in smaller pieces. So Basin 1 will be the first segment or area of the sanitary sewer to evaluate and determine what projects need to be done to help improve I&I.
Okay. My second question was for the chief. I saw in the weekly report that the DUGIS deadline has just been pushed back 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So was this work plan done before or after we knew that?
This was done before we knew that. We just got word of that last week.
Okay.
So we'll be continuing to work with it, but that was something really, the timeline, because it's run by DuPage County, was out of our control. It doesn't mean that it's stalled. It just means that certain things with the software systems and manufacturer of the software, there's been a holdup in it, and that's where the snag comes in.
Okay, so does that mean that the amount of time we're going to have to put in will be greater, or that we just don't have to work on it now and we'll work on it later?
No, we're continuing to work on it now because a lot of the things that are going into place, like running the lines for it, what have you, the training is ongoing. It's just a matter of when all three of the phases with the net RMS, the CAD with 911, when they all get plugged in together, so to speak, is what's going to be the delay with the software.
Okay, I mean, I saw that the deadline is still in fiscal year 19, so it's not like this would be moved down in the priority because we don't have to get it done until later.
Right. It's not going to be moved down.
Okay,
Correct.
just to clarify. Okay, so I guess as part of the discussion, we want feedback from us on where you think these priorities should be, or you want feedback from us on which things we'd like you to put off, or whether we're just okay with all of these number 3 items not being worked on this year. I'm asking what's the most constructive kind of feedback I can have to get this discussion started that isn't specifically questions about these items. Like, there's a lot of things on here that I'm sure there's more to know about why you would prioritize it than I know. You know, like Point Oak Drive seems to have been stalled for years, and yet it's coming across as a number 2 priority ahead of updating the city's website, which surprises me unless all of a sudden all the Point Oak Drive residents have come together and agreed on everything. And that would shock me.
If I may, the answer to your first couple of questions is yes, we want input. Yeah, this is, we're getting feedback here.
You're dead now.
Can you shut that? We gotta. We're duplicating mics and
Move it up.
they're canceling each other out. We need input on whether we should move things up, move things down. If they're okay, we'd like collective and individual feedback. In fact, that should be part of the discussion. You may have some aldermen that want to move some things up, some aldermen don't see some things as important. In all those questions, that's why the staff is here. If they're not at a committee meeting, we'll bring the answers back. If it's for the chief and we're Public Works and Infrastructure, we'll make sure we get him that question. But all of those things, yes. We certainly want to answer your questions so you all understand why we put things and where we put them in what priority ranking. But we also want to make sure that we're in sync with what the council wants to have done in the next year and beyond.
Okay, so I should go down and look at a couple that seem higher or lower than I think might be appropriate and ask the staff why.
Absolutely.
All right, so Point Oak Drive, why is that a number 2 priority?
It's a 2 priority from my perspective because the city was able to secure an apparent dedication of the majority of the right-of-way from the developer of the Point Oak Drive subdivision. So he signed dedication plats that dedicated the property on which Point Oak Drive exists that he had control of. It's currently owned privately by a number of individuals, but he claimed, and our previous city attorney felt that he retained the ability to dedicate those sections of Point Oak Drive to the city of Warrenville. So he's executed plats. We have not accepted or recorded those dedications because that's not all of Point Oak Drive. There's a couple of other individual property owners that control and own a couple of segments of Point Oak Drive that we would still need to get their dedication from. We feel it's relatively urgent to try to work through that issue and conclude whether or not there's an ability to acquire those, I'll call it the remnant sections, in a timely fashion, otherwise potentially risk losing the opportunity to record those plats that we already have executed from the original owner. So it's kind of a time-sensitive issue. If we don't move forward and make a decision and finalize whether we can get those remnant pieces, we may be precluded from recording those previously plats of dedication that were executed by the prior developer.
Okay, well, if he's had rights for dozens of years now, why would his rights change in the next fiscal year?
His rights didn't change, but he executed plats, and I don't think he can execute plats. At some point, the city has to record or kind of get off the pot, you might say.
Okay, well, it still doesn't seem clear to me why there's a time sensitivity. If he's willing to do it, he's willing to do it, and we can...
He was willing to do it at a point in time. I don't think we can go back to him and have him re-execute those plats. He was cooperative for a short period of time.
Okay. Let's see, who's on the evaluating building security needs for City Hall? That's to do with just the cameras we were going to put in a few places around?
The cameras are already in. That's the expansion of some of the other security needs that were listed in the 2010 evaluation, including looking at possibly panic buttons and potentially adding some cameras at the Public Works Department and panic buttons potentially there as well. So it's following up on the 2010 security evaluation that was done and trying to progress some of those issues along because they haven't been progressed far enough at this point.
Okay, I mean, again, this seems like a stalled thing, which, if there are other things that are more important, could perhaps be moved down because it's waited this long anyway.
Right, and as a matter of just what happens throughout the course of the year, that may be what occurs.
Okay. In the same vein, I'm not trying to diminish any of the importance of a lot of these things, but in the same vein, the administration of the private property drainage assistant program, again, that's something that seems to have waited many years and could wait a little longer if it's a question of prioritizing things. I don't know if I'm addressing this to Deputy Public Works Director Kukler.
Council identified this as a priority last year. With the budget process, we had a group of residents here from Lakeview and Harvest. That
Yes,
project
I
got
remember.
done, and then we went through the whole establishing the private property drainage assistance policy. with
Right,
rolling
and the
that out
Harvest
this-
Court project's already been finished, right? And presumably there are going to be other applicants and other future identified projects, but that was a situation that'd been sitting around for 25 years, I believe, is what I was told, right? So if it's a question of what can we put off another year, that seems to me like, I'm just throwing it out here, if we're having this discussion about priorities, that seems to me like something that could wait a year, especially since we're spending city money for private improvements. So I guess I would suggest those 3 items if we're moving anything down from number 2. And then looking at number 3, just to discuss which items might be worthwhile moving up. The first one I would come up with is the city website redesign. And I would say in particular, the city mobile website, which is awful and unusable. And it has been waiting over 3 years.
We internally had a lot of discussion about the city website, and originally it was a higher priority issue, and then it got moved down predominantly because the ERP project is going to take, and I know we keep saying this, is going to take a huge investment of time from various different staff. And part of that investment of time right now is anticipating a HR/IT/assistant city administrator commitment of about 50% of my time next year, plus some additional time on the steering committee. And so with that, and with the fact that the website redesign would also fall predominantly under my lead with assistance from the other departments because of the content, the need to update content and photos, and to talk about the design and the layout of the website and how we can make it easier for people to get to the different areas of the website that has the most traffic. It's just not going to be feasible realistically for me to do that in this upcoming year with the ERP.
So if we're already, several of the other things on this list, expanding city communication, outreach, expanding social media, and so on, are already being deprioritized. And that's fine. I can understand that, posting fun things on Facebook is not our top priority, absolutely. But a city website is pretty basic at this point. This is 2018.
Sure.
And ours is awful. The number of people who look at websites only on phones and tablets is shooting through the roof. I'm sure I could pull out numbers if I'd had time to do any research, but it's growing like crazy. And our city website is not terrible and could be considered usable, but the mobile version is not.
Right. So one of the things that I am looking at is, can we upgrade the platform that the website is on and potentially improve the mobility aspect without doing a full-blown website redesign? So that is a conversation I'm having with Civic Plus. Actually, one of the conversations I'm having is tomorrow, and I will be able to provide more information as we get further into the budget process as to what options exist for us without going through a full website redesign to try to improve what's already there.
Okay, and while you're discussing it with them, my other question has to do with what the requirements, I suppose, are on there. We'll do this redesign for you for free. We don't want to waste this free website redesign because we're deprioritizing this right now. We already paid for it.
Right, and that is one of the questions.
Let me interject if I...
Oh, thank you. 2 quick things. One, I want to back up. Sorry.
I want to back up for 1 second to the private property drainage program. We will touch on that next week related to the inflow and infiltration I&I study. We believe on staff, and we didn't get into that right now because it's kind of getting in the weeds on it, but I just want to mention that is likely going to be one of the solutions we will provide, because part of the I&I program isn't just relining leaking sanitary sewer pipes or replacing old pipes, sealing inlets, sealing manholes. Those things are all part of it, but there's also very probably going to be a program of concerted effort to get people to remove their illegal sump pump connections from the sanitary sewer. They're not supposed to go into the sanitary sewer drains. We've had voluntary programs in the past, but you need to give them some place to dump that water so it's not just flooding their backyards. In some, not everywhere, not all the time, but in some circumstances, that will be that new drain pipe, just as it was in Harvest Court and Lakeview, where now people can tie their sump pumps in or run them to that for an inlet so it solves that other problem. If we just make them disconnect them and there's nowhere for it to go, it's unlikely that's going to be a long-term measure that's going to be successful, because past experience says if you don't give them a place to put it that works better, it ends up getting reconnected when we're not there inspecting it again. So I just want to note that is why part of that may be tied to the inflow and infiltration program we're going to be required to do. Another point I want to make, and thank you, because those are the kind of questions we need to talk about so you all understand and we get your direction, exactly what you're doing. But as you're seeing, I think, or I'm seeing as you're having the discussion, everything isn't a one-to-one measure. While the citywide website, I agree with you completely, we've talked about that. The mobile one is really bad. The citywide website, the basic one is, it's okay, but it could be a lot better in the future. But taking away something like the drainage program where Public Works wouldn't be as involved would only help with them putting content in, but we've got to free up administration staff to take that on. I use that as an example because taking away that big project in Public Works doesn't necessarily free up administration to be able to start that.
Right,
So
which
all that
is why
input is
I
valuable, but we have
listed
to
an
be
administrative
careful it won't work
item,
quite
a
that
community
simple.
development item, and a public works item when I was
Okay.
identifying 3 items that looked like they could be moved down.
Okay, I
mean,
appreciate that.
I understand what you're saying, but I
Okay.
did think of that.
Thank you. I just wanted to point that out if everyone else may not have. And it was a good example. It's not always a one-to-one, but I appreciate your
Sure.
thoughts on all of that.
And the amount of time that someone might spend on a city website might not be the same as the amount of time they spend on evaluating building security needs. But
Sure.
they're both listed here as items that the administration department is overseeing.
Right, and that's what this discussion's for, admittedly.
Right. Okay, well, I guess my other question, and this is also for Christina, had to do with implementing the remaining diversity objectives from the 2015 strategic plan. And the reason that I mention this is strictly because the amount of time that at least several of those items would take seems to me to be trivial.
Okay.
You know, calling surrounding community resources, the library, other cities, to find out how they do it so that we can be better and use their ideas. It might take a little time, but it wouldn't take anybody weeks. And the last few times we've reported status on this item, I believe it always pretty much said, no progress. And that's a frustrating thing to me because some of these items do seem to be a relatively trivial amount of time. When you consider how important diversity is, that it was, the number 6 item on our economic and strategic development plan of the goal for our whole city. We really prioritize diversity, and I think it's important that people see us making that a priority. So having it something we don't have any time for at all seems to me to be a little extreme.
Go ahead. There is some of the items under the diversity goal, like looking at our recruitment efforts and improving our recruitment efforts, we've already started doing and have done. The parts of I apologize, but I'm recalling from memory, the parts of the diversity goal that were prioritized as the first 2 or 3 did involve what appeared to us when we were going through it as something that would involve a greater measure of time, because there was some need to convene a work group or a committee that was made up of staff and council members to reach out to other areas of the community, to talk to community leaders, to have some sort of regular communication and meetings to try to figure out what we could be doing better to pull in some more diverse groups of people onto our committees and on our boards and through our planning efforts with special events. And so those were the things, because they were prioritized as top-level goals, that we felt like would require a greater commitment of time than what we could realistically provide this year. Potentially with some of the things you've identified as far as making some phone calls or doing some minimal research, those may be things that we can accomplish realistically, but when we looked at it, it was more of a, can we make a measurable impact on this goal with any great success this year with all of the other tier 1 and tier 2 level priorities. And then the other thing I just wanted to add to that, that may not, again, come across on this list in the different department work plans, and I'm going to speak both for finance and administration for a second. Our departments are a little bit different than that of community development and public works, because we act as more of a support network for the other departments than anything else. So for me especially, it's difficult sometimes to really measure or plan for how many recruitments am I going to have next year, how many people are going to potentially leave or retire that I'm not aware of, how many workers' comp or liability claims are going to come in next year. Those are the things that are sometimes a question mark that end up taking a significant input of time from the administration department, that makes it a little bit challenging when we're doing the work plans this far in advance to really over-allocate resources, not really knowing how those numbers are going to shake out in the upcoming year. So knowing that the ERP is going to be a significant amount of time, knowing that likely because we've had on average about 10 recruitments per year in the last 2 years, that may continue into next year. That's what we were looking at when we were factoring the citywide, and what we were looking at when we were doing our administration department work plan.
I want to emphasize, Christina hit it right on, but I want to emphasize a couple of points under diversity. Years before we even set that strategic plan goal, the city had established its recruiting practices and hiring practices in such a way that we have increased every year. We haven't been keeping score and reporting it because it's a little awkward to do that, but every year going back, even before I was here, we have increased the number of Hispanic, Latino, Spanish-speaking, and other minority employees. We've gone from a couple to, I believe we have at least a dozen that would fall in those categories. And in every department, we have Spanish-speaking people to communicate with our large growing Hispanic and Latino population. In addition, empirically, we don't have counts. You can see the police department has done a tremendous job with developing the national line out. We talked about community events and festivals and increasing participation by minority residents, especially the Hispanic Latino population in our community. National Night Out, many of you have attended there. I know you have, Alderman, and you see a large number of families and people, Spanish-speaking, et cetera, that are attending that event, very involved. I have observed at the 4th of July event this last year, there was a much larger number of representatives of that population. That's empirical evidence. It isn't factual. We didn't do a head count. We don't have gates where people are counted or kept track of or anything. We can't do that, but I have noticed a far larger percent, which is a good sign to me that we're making big progress there. It's the bigger, more complex things, or the more complex parts of that goal, increasing the number of Hispanic, Latino, and minorities on boards and commissions, and even the city council. It takes a partnership with the community and with some elected officials to get that going, which will take a little bit more time. We do have some guides from other communities, some things that have worked well in large and small communities in Illinois and other parts of the country. When I was at my conference in October, I attended some programs about diversity, ways to increase diversity, make people have conversations about diversity, feel more comfortable. It involved dinners in people's homes. You line up volunteers, but it takes some time to get those efforts done. It's not, certainly it takes a smaller amount of time to do that research or learn about some ideas, but it takes a lot more time to get involved with those, and that's what we're struggling with, trying to get our good footing. We don't want to start something and not carry it through in a positive way. We don't want it to become a negative if we don't if we do it in a half-hearted effort. So that's languishing. The other part of the strategic plan is we haven't gotten to a point where we can measure the outcomes, whether it's all the economic development successes or any of the other 6 goals. And we have a whole list of things that we've done, but we haven't measured the action steps and how we've accomplished each one like we did with the 2007 strategic plan. We found a group to help us do that for a lot less expensive. We went out for requests for proposals about a year ago. We asked for the same kind of services that we had with the last plan, and I think that cost us about $20,000 or $30,000 for a couple of years, and these proposals came in around $100,000. We set them aside to regroup and try to figure out how to do that because the costs were way over what we had planned and budgeted. So your point's taken. We haven't made all the progress we wanted to. We can't document all the progress we wanted to, but I wanted to make sure we pointed out the city has a council of the community, the staff has made some progress in some of those key areas.
So then really, determining our implementation steps, progress on the entire strategic plan should be here on the list, since I don't see anything like that. But you've just specifically called out the diversity objectives, which is strange. As something not to work on. If we've really decided not to work on that whole thing because the cost was outside of our budget, then I'm surprised that's not on the list.
Something we have to go back and look at. We're having a little caucus conversation here. We'll carry that on after the meeting. But
All right, can we move on to
we'll get
something
back on
else and let them discuss it, and we can talk about it at the next meeting?
Back to that.
Give them a chance to come up with an answer to your question. I'm not quite sure that they're ready to do that right now. Do you have other things that you'd like to ask?
Well, the last sort of overall question was that if the concern here is getting the work plan to match our staff, then putting the overall city staffing down in level 3 seems surprising too. I understand you said that that would be taken care of in 2020 so that we wouldn't have this backlog issue again with work that doesn't match our staff and resources. But if that's the impetus for doing this entire work plan project list, having it listed as a low priority item surprised me.
Yeah, the staffing study, first of all, if we started doing it even this coming year, it would be more than a year before we'd have the results and be able to implement them, and then hiring takes another 6 to 9 months, so it's still in the future. But that city staffing services and facilities study is to look at the development in the community, the growth in the community, and whether or not we have right-sized or we need to right-size our departments. Do we have enough police? Do we have enough room in the police department? Do we have enough room in public works? How do we make use of the city hall spaces? Do we need to reorganize those? But that's put off in the future because the development plans are there now. Some are in preliminary approvals, some are close to final approvals, but they're not built yet. So we want to measure that in a more reactive way with the outcomes, that we know the development's there, and then do somewhat of a reactive response that we realize we've started to get more police calls because of a single-family home development or whatever, what have you, the commercial development. The Thorntons requires a lot more need, but they'd be built and then we know they're there. We don't want to start that study and then have, I hope not, another recession where everything stops and then we've added 3 police, 2 inspectors, and something else and not need them. So there's a balancing act there, but we want to try to keep as close to the front edge of that development and the services needs as possible. Some of it also may be increasing the size or adding on to some of our facilities. We're not there right now. We don't project those needs for the present workload. That's just the staff engineer and the other position that we talked about to keep up on reprioritizing what we need to do now. I hope that answered that.
In terms of, before we go on to further discussion, in terms of process, you have presented, staff has presented these 3 tiers to us that you've obviously very carefully considered, and you've got things prioritized. In order for the council to make changes in those tiers, my assumption would be that a majority of the council would have to agree to make those changes, that we're not going to make changes. Say if one person says, I feel strongly about this, we don't make that change. We let the council decide if that change is going to be made. Is that the way you perceive this process moving forward? That we always operate on a majority of the council in terms of making changes?
That's the way I perceive this in every process with the council, yes.
Okay, just wanted to make that clear. Now, other people had comments or questions. Treasurer?
Due to the late hour, I'm going to hold my question for another time.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Alderman Widener?
Yeah, I think this is a really great first step and for a first-year project. I don't know if it was on a project list initially, but it's great to see this kind of thought put into it, and I think it captures a lot of the projects. Some of them are more related to programs, some are individual projects as I look at them, and I think that they should be adjusted. Like, you know, you see that the, what was it? The electronic agenda packets. I mean, that's a singular project that could be rolled into a whole communications effort or something like that. I see some of these things as being long-lasting programs and other as individual projects that could be taken on. And I think there ought to be some way of developing, I don't know, when I've seen these kinds of things before, I've seen like a numerical ranking system so that, you know, it's not necessarily the loudest voice that gets the shifting of the priorities, that it's based on the council's ranking of those opportunities or options or something like that, so that it's, you know, fair and square, I guess, would be the way that I would look at this. Some of these, just to give, you know, some reaction to some of the listings, you know, the administration of the private property drainage system program, that's a new program. I mean, there was a lot of staff time, I think, that was spent on developing and getting ready to administer that program. To forestall it by moving it to a lower rank, I think would defeat the whole purpose of what we, you know, asked you to do in the past year, even though the first project that was initiated had been out there for 25 years. I think, you know, it's a good thing as long as we've got the formation of it and everything like that to keep it ranked where it is. I think it's in a good spot. The other comment I had was with regard to the unprecedented growth that the city is experiencing right now and our communication needs. It's like, you know, you can wait for a study to tell you what you need, what you know already, and it's just like, you know, the city's in this spot where it's advancing with its developments, and I think we have to keep up so that we can communicate with the people that are going to be in those new developments and show our best side. And I think sometimes, you know, if you were to look at a marketing and communication specialist, which most towns and villages have in their department, you would be able to knock off, you know, 3 or 4 of the tier 3 items that revolve around, you know, communication, city website design, and so forth. So I'm not so certain that, you know, a citywide staffing study, you know, I recognize its importance, but I think that there's some, you know, like with what you determined with the engineer, there may be other, you know, important positions that need to be filled that we know about without doing a staffing study. And I'd be interested in, I guess, having conversations about that, because, you know, if the assistant city administrator is involved in all these day-to-day projects and the ERP and everything like that, she's, you know, fully occupied in that job. It's not likely that it'll change and there'll be free hours for something else in the next year. And I just think that, you know, maybe the city's staffing growth pattern has to match what the outside economic development opportunities are providing it too. I don't know. A lot of times, you know, you fall behind and then you catch up, but you don't want to fall too far behind before you catch up with these new initiatives. So those are just, you know, some of the thoughts I have, off the top of my head. And I think it's again, it's a first-year effort, and we're going to refine this as it goes along. And I think you've captured a lot of good things, and it'll inspire a lot of good conversation as we move ahead. Thank you.
If I could comment on the one with the communications person, I'm not quite sure what we would even call it yet. We are going to touch on that next week. Christina will, among many other things, lead our budget presentation for the administration department. And that's something we'll touch on in terms of the position we're asking for and the position that we haven't yet asked for. Just beyond that comment, the communications person or someone, it's very typical, you're absolutely right, of bigger cities and virtually all counties and Forest Preserve District, anyone with any size has those folks. Smaller towns, we're kind of in between. We've got enough growth and I'm going to say sophistication in population, daytime population, et cetera. We seem to be bigger. I'm not going to give you a good description of this, but we're bigger than our size population-wise. I hope that makes some sense. We're kind of a bigger community than 13,000 people would indicate. We're not really a small town anymore. We're doing a lot more sophisticated things than that. I think that's part of your point. Mayor and I go to a lot of DuPage mayors and managers meetings, and that's where it became the most obvious to me, in addition to some of the press conferences and other things that we've attended recently on legislative issues. The bigger cities all they complain their staffs in their communications departments are too small. They only have 5 people on staff. I said, what are you complaining about? We have Christina and I trying to do this stuff with Alma and do it on the side in the spare time. We don't have time to do it. We do it the best we can. We're doing a pretty good job for not having resources. I don't mean to diminish what we've tried to put out there. And the rest of the staff has helped with that too. I don't mean to leave them out. They post things and others. But we're doing it on the side when we can find time to put something out there that's important, and we don't in any way pretend that we're leading or on the cutting edge or trying to put out information. We've got a new branding plan, marketing plan. We have a lot of economic development. We're trying to compete with all of our neighbors, and we don't have the tools and staff in that regard. We're trying to get our feet under us on that, and I'm not sure. We're still evaluating it, and it's a good point. We'll get more to that discussion next week. I'll have next week's discussion. We'll still be here for that meeting. Thank you.
Okay, that's a good start.
Thank you.
Some things to think about, and I appreciate the effort, the global effort to try to get a big picture future deployment of how we're going to handle all the things that we have to handle. It will be very helpful when we finally get the decision of what these tiers are comprised of, because then we have that as a document to move forward with, and it will clear up a lot of confusion as to what our priorities are. So this is an important, I think, exercise for us to do. It will be certainly probably painful at some points because you can't always do everything you want to do, and not everyone's going to agree on what the priorities are. But if we, again, move ahead with a majority consensus from the council as to what these tiers are comprised of, we'll be in a good position to accomplish things at a level of quality that we can be proud of. Again, you can spread yourself so thin that you try to do everything and you don't do anything well. It'd be better to put some things to defer them in order to do a good job or a great job with the things that we decide to do. So I appreciate the council taking time to look at these tiers and come back again with further discussion and propose changes that the council can actually act on. And then we'll follow through that process, and hopefully we'll get to a point where everyone will be able to vote on the final composition of the tiers, and we'll have that as a document to move forward with. So thank you so much for the effort already put in. Okay. Goodness, we don't need a closed session. That's a good thing, so we can cross that off. And we do need, however, Alderman Widener, do you think you could provide us with that final motion?
I recommend I'd make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second by Alderman Davalos. All in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.